Hello, I'm Paul Yeager, and this is Mike Borland. Today we are at the WHO TV studios in Des Moines, Iowa. Our thanks to Bill Pierson and Rod Peterson for their studio with producer Randy Schumacher and Cliff Brockman. Today is an oral history. It is February the 6th, 2025. Mike Borland, longtime photojournalist, used to be chief photojournalist here in your old studios.
Right.
Let's talk about growing up, though, first. Humboldt, Iowa kid. Did you always want to be working in television when you were a young man?
No, I didn't want to work in television until I was halfway through college. The guy who lived on my floor was working in the film lab at Channel 13 and wanted to cut his hours back, which meant that they had a bit of an opening, so I took that and then found out that broadcast journalism is stories that are a minute and a half long, 2 minutes long, and newspaper stories are as long as you can make them. And I thought, why don't I do this television thing?
And you were at Iowa State?
I was at Drake.
You were at Drake
Yep.
at this time. So the commute wasn't long.
Right.
So you had this aspiration of being a print guy?
A journalist. I was going to be the next Donald Call.
Okay.
Except when I got out of college, there was still Donald Call. So I couldn't be the next one because he was still
He was still there.
Yeah, he was still around. And there can only be really one, maybe two of those kind of columnists at a newspaper. And so it was a little naive maybe in thinking that that could be right out of college kind of thing to do.
Film means we're talking the 70s, right?
1977 was when I started, and the station was transitioning from shooting entirely on film to video and film. So early days of videotape and editing on video, where editing on film, it was a physical thing. It wasn't just electrons. When you edited the film, you had the original film, and you physically cut it. And so you destroyed a couple frames every time you made an edit. So you couldn't use the 5-second version at 6 o'clock and the 12-second version at 10 o'clock because it didn't exist anymore. And you didn't make a backup copy because who has time for that, and it would be expensive. Going back to Humboldt, though, when I was in high school there, maybe a freshman, Harry Reasoner he grew up in Humboldt and did a documentary on the greatest small town in the U.S., kind of looking at Humboldt as an example of growing up in a small town. And I don't know if I was in that for more than a second or two. I was never featured in it, but to see a TV crew in your hometown when it's a small town kind of gets you thinking along those lines.
The lights, the glitz, probably 12 people for that film were there for a little while.
Could have been a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and that's exciting to see. I know
Right.
that's, one of the things that always drew me is when you'd see, what are they doing? That looks fun. Yeah. And did it look fun or just interesting at first?
Interesting. But I was, worked on the school newspaper and then went to Drake and was in the news editorial journalism major until got that job at the TV station and was processing film, which is still a ways from journalism. And then went on to do more and more as we transitioned over to video and didn't use film anymore. I was still employed, so I had to do something. So it was send Mike out with a video camera. And it never did really jump over into reporting. That's what I wanted to do, but was told by several news directors that no, we're going to keep you doing what you're doing.
So you had asked to be a reporter on air?
Yeah, and I think just kind of that mindset made a difference in some of the work that I did do and made it so that it was natural for me to talk with the reporters and collaborate more than maybe average photographer would do, that I would have more ideas on what a good story is or what the thread of the story might be. Things like that. Ideas. I wrote probably a third of the stand-ups that I shot.
For someone else.
For someone else, yes.
You were field producing and photojournalism.
Well, right. And there was a lot of turnover here, and there always is in broadcast journalism, because I think a lot of people get into it and they see, like you described, that it looks pretty glamorous, it looks pretty fun, and then they find out this isn't for me. And so there's another eager person ready to take that place. So I spent a lot of time working with people that were getting started in the business and finding their way and maybe overwhelmed, and I tried to help and guide those people.
We would have gotten there eventually, but because the end of your career, you really were dealing with reporters that were fresh, maybe even in school. Whereas the beginning of your career, they probably had 5 to 10 years experience before they came to Des Moines.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
and that was probably one of the biggest changes, I'm guessing, from a newsroom makeup, and just the overall average age dropped.
Right. When I was starting and in school and part-time, that was pretty unusual. And then to be full-time at 13 right out of college, even as a photographer, was pretty unusual. Mm-hmm. And I guess I didn't look at it as that unusual because it was me going through it. But I'm sure there were others that how did he get that job and I didn't? And yeah, it was second or third stop on the career for a lot of the people that worked at 13.
We'll talk about some of those people in a minute. I want to go back to the 70s. Let's go equipment. We talk about film. Mm-hmm. The stories weren't as long because you just didn't have, that's just not the way it was. What was the camera like? That little film camera. That's the end of the line of those news film cameras.
It was, we used CP16s, Cinema Products was the CP, and they had 2 channels of audio that were recorded onto a single track, so there was no separating the audio like we do today. Mm-hmm. It would be a left and a right or 1 and a 2, and it was all on one thing. And on film, because of the mechanics of it, as the film is going through the camera, it gets exposed here and the sound gets recorded in another spot. And so we had machines that you had to take your film and run it through that, and would move the sound so it's synced up with the audio or with the video, and then edit and then put it all back for projection. It just ran off of a projector onto the air.
I never saw the projector, but I have heard so many tell that story. There's no filming a fire at 9 p.m. for the 10 o'clock news at that point, right? I mean, what was the quickest turnaround you could have with film?
Well, because I ran the machine. I know the normal speed, I think it was 26 minutes from the time the first frame got in, the first solution, until it was dry at the other end. And then if you shot 10 minutes of film, then you have to add that on to it as well. And you have to have the time where you take the film from the mechanism that it's in and put it onto a reel in a dark room, and then
That's right.
then you can take it out and put it on the machine. And some of the compartments, the solutions that it was going through, all that had to be done in the dark as well until it got to a certain point in the developing. Once it got through the first couple chemicals, you could turn the speed up if you really had to have it fast. And
You need to put fast in quotations.
right,
Mike.
fast for that time. And you would feel the film as it came out to make sure it was dry, and so it wouldn't stick together as you were editing. So we could cut that time down some. One of the things that I think about that period of television, before live was really something that, mobile live was really something that was done a lot. And you had that downtime, because you talk about the time and the processes, you also had to get to that machine. Mm-hmm. So if you were a half hour out of town, a half hour back to the machine's going to take another 45 minutes to an hour. And now you can look at it, it's still not ready to air. And in that time, reporter had time to kind of think about what the story was and maybe formulate in his mind the important things and how to put it together and make it maybe more understandable, or maybe realize that this isn't the important thing. It was, I guess the point I'm trying to make is there's less of the, it's happening now and we're just going to spit it out at you with no filter of what it all means. And in some ways that's good, some ways it's bad. I know we talk about, you know, the bias of journalists, and for the most part, the journalists that I worked with were really trying to keep that bias out of their work. It was really, really important to them, and it really, really is important to them now as they do it.
And again, the age of the reporter helped.
Right.
Their perspective, knowing how to figure out what might be a story. As digital comes in, where you're editing tape and it's not film anymore. How was that transition for folks like you who were recording in the field, and then the bosses who would say, gosh, we can now do it in half the time or a third of the time? Was there a big change in thinking and how to cover the news when you went away from film to tape?
Not really, because there were a lot fewer broadcasts as well. Here we had 5 minutes twice in the morning, and then 15 minutes at noon, and then a half hour at 6 and a half hour at 10. That was all. And I mean, that seems like a lot, and it's not by today's standards at all. So you really, a lot of times, had the time to get it done. A reporter that spoke at a workshop, and people asked him, you know, how do you get this done, and how much time do you have left over, and so on. He says, no matter what the story is, I'm done about 10 minutes before it airs.
Right.
If I've got 3 days to do it, or if I've got just this afternoon to do it. So I think you still make it get done, and you use your time wisely. And sometimes the wise use of time is just get it done.
That never changed.
Right.
That always is there. I love that whole, I'll get it done 10 minutes ahead of when it needs to be done. What do you remember? Did your back hurt? Did your shoulder hurt from carrying some of that gear in the beginning?
Yeah. And the cameras that we used was an RCA TK76, was the first video camera. And it had a flat, I think it was aluminum bottom. And then we put a pistol grip device on there that had holes cut out of it, I think, to save some weight. But that also meant you have those circles on your shoulder, and no pad with that. And they were 20-some pounds, depending on how they were configured. And then we put a battery on that instead of wearing battery belts, because at first you had a belt for the camera, a belt for any light that you were going to use that weighed more than the belt for the camera. And then you had a tape deck that was another 35 pounds or so. And then you had the cables. Even the cables that connected them were several pounds. So it was physically demanding. And I think at times, I think it wasn't really a bias. It was who are the people that can do this physically? You know, be able to pick all this stuff and haul it or move with it while you're recording and stuff like that. And I know have a lot of friends who have issues now, physical issues, not just, you know, some of the other issues, but that, you know, probably have some lingering effects. I don't know that I have some, because I am active and I do a lot of things anyway, and things, you know, over the decades, wear and tear from other things happen too.
You were smart and efficient with your physical activity with the camera. Let's call it that.
Let's say that.
Let's say it that way.
Yeah. Well, and I think it did help to be above average size, and I don't know that I would call myself athletic for the entire time that I was a photographer, but you know, when I started, 20 years old and fresh off of, you know, high school football and basketball and things like that, probably in better shape than a lot of the population. And I think also kind of an awareness and being able to see things peripherally from being, you know, involved in athletics and so on, and being able to have my attention split. Here's what I'm recording, here's what's happening over here, and I can't stop doing this, but I got to go over there soon. That kind of thing.
Equipment changes, M2 to, you know, beta, and then it's HD, and then it's your phone. When was the best time to shoot video in your career?
Oh, I think it just got better and better. So the best time was was when I got done. It just got better and easier, and just kind of a marvel at the things that we used to, the limitations that we used to have that we didn't know were limitations until we found other ways around it, like being able to edit non-linear and try something and then undo it just like that, instead of on film, like I said, if you tried something, that was it, you destroyed that. But to be able to try it, I didn't like that. Do it again. You could do that to some degree with videotape, but then it was all edit, edit, edit. There were no effects. And while my style, I guess, was never to use a lot of effects, if I wanted to use one in the days of videotape, it was a lot harder to do, obviously. And I won't go
Probably
into
the
all
old,
those
probably
things.
the old A/B rolling type thing.
Right.
You had to have two tapes, and somebody in the control room had to switch at the right time. And
Yeah, well, we actually
Oh,
had
yeah.
one edit room here that we could do that in. We had 2 play machines and a record machine and a switcher. So we could do dissolves. We could do some really odd looking wipes and things too that I don't know if ever you push those buttons. But and then that kind of took a toll. I would be able to do a package with wipes in under an hour, which is, to me, was pushing it. I know other people could probably do it faster, but for me that was a lot of work. And then switching to nonlinear to be able to do that same thing with the same, I guess, production level is a matter of minutes. I mean, it's, so the time is freed up, and there's also more newscasts and more demands and social media and the website for the station. And so that time gets eaten up in other ways.
you mentioned the tape stories, but so much of things now is live. There isn't storytelling, it's live telling. And there's live shots, or there's, you send a reporter out by themselves and they are talking in front of the state capitol to tell the story. There's no video underneath it. It's just, oh, we have a live shot. Does that make good television and storytelling?
It can make good television. I think to be able to take the events that you're reporting live about and think about them and put them into more context is a better way to keep people informed and a better use of their time. If you can compact the important and put it in this much time instead of the here's so-and-so and the introduction and then the outro, and in the meantime they've been able to say some things, but they haven't been able to explain as deeply or get to the things that would make an impression upon a person in that storytelling.
They don't get to have the car ride with you to
Right.
talk over the story, which is something you've said that was in that enjoyable talking through with those reporters. That bouncing off back and forth is kind of gone right now for some reporters.
Right, and I think that was important, and not just in talking about the story, but talking about technique and talking about learning and talking about this story could then lead to the next story, or this it relates to. What I worked on yesterday might not have been the same thing that reporter worked on yesterday. So I worked on something related to what we're doing today, and they didn't. So I can catch them up on that and fill in some of those gaps. Another thing, one thing that I've did my entire career was steal ideas and sayings from people, and pretty shameless about it. Another thing from a workshop was the importance of the rule of thirds. And in photography, there's one definition of the rule of thirds, and the other is the rule of thirds in driving to the story. And that is 1/3 of the time you complain about work, 1/3 of the time you talk about personal things and catch up with family and other events, and 1/3 of the time you talk about the story. And that third of the time is important to whoever's going to consume the story.
Because you might not have been at the assignment meeting in the morning to know what you're doing. And that reporter, because you probably get to that last third, like, what are we doing today? Oh, and the reporter by that time hopefully has processed something. And then No, that's not actually what I think the story is. That's what we covered yesterday. What are we doing today?
Right.
You can provide that feedback, and hopefully reporters listen to you, and you could listen to the reporter and have that back and forth to figure out what's the best story for today.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you had that a lot of times?
I think so, yeah. If not that or some other historical perspective based on how long I was here compared to someone that is still learning, their way around downtown.
You can't get from there to here in 2
Yeah,
minutes.
right.
Some knucklehead on the assignment desk or a young producer trying to tell you those things.
Yeah.
We won't get into that. Those people
There's assignment desk time, and then there's the actual time.
I'm aware, fully aware, Mike, of how that works. It can be much quicker or slower, and I have to argue. You talk about workshops. One of the things that I was always amazed at your involvement was in the NPPA and other. Why did you feel being involved with those professional organizations was important for you?
Because I could spend work days out of the station. That wasn't really it, but it was learning from people whose work I admired, and finding better ways to do what I do, and then being able to share that. It was about growth and learning, and that's one thing that if I think I did one thing right during my career, it was to keep learning throughout, and to stay current with things, and not say, well, this is the way we've done it, and damn it, that's how we're going to do it from now on. But to be more looking forward, and how can we do this better, and how can we cover the stories that we've been doing, and look at how they do that story, and it's really interesting, and let's make ours more interesting.
Because you would bring that information back then to your staff.
Oh, yeah.
And how long were you chief photographer here?
I don't remember.
A long time? Was it 20 years?
Maybe.
Yeah. And so that was there a certain point, because you had several news directors that cycled through, did you have to say to management and defend, if we're going to be a good station, we need to be able to do this sharing of knowledge or going to these conferences? Did you feel that strongly about it and how you had to defend?
Right, and I think there were a couple news directors that really bought into it, and one didn't buy into it really until we kind of showed him. And it wasn't just me at that time, there were several other photographers that really felt strongly that visual storytelling was a way to make the stories stand out, to make them memorable, to build an audience, to get people that are looking forward to seeing the newscasts. And maybe it's not like we're going to get home in time to watch the news at 6 o'clock, but when they did, that they knew that it would be worth it. And so with that kind of seeing the success, and some of it was through contests and awards and so on, to then have a little bit more investment in the things and make our jobs a little bit easier and easier to do things the way that was more interesting for the audience. I think that kind of built upon itself.
Now, granted, I had several interactions with you over the years, but I always felt, Mike, you knew the importance of you would make every interview look as good as it could. And if there was somebody coming to the station, it's very easy to throw them up against the same blank wall. And I'm guessing that drove you crazy because you built certain things that were allowed to be, and you pushed your staff to let's do a little better. Let's have a light. Let's have some depth. Let's turn it. I've stolen from you on that over the years with people. Why did you feel that was better to help tell the story for the overall product?
Well, if you can see things better and more clearly, and it's more like you can see it with your own eyes. It's not dark. It's not shaky. It's not a different color. Or even, I think people can get in the habit when they're working of, we're going to set up this interview, like you said, in front of the same wall at the same time. And just for me, I would want some variety in that. You don't want the same person in the same spot, even a week apart, and have a viewer think, didn't I see this already? And one of the things that we did at one point was I kind of instituted a 2-light minimum for interviews and live shots, especially live shots at night. If you didn't have 2 lights, then I could tell and you might hear from me.
I like
And
that.
there should be a good reason to not have 2 lights. And sometimes that led to 3 lights, 4 lights, 5 lights, and we're going to move in our live shot from this spot to this spot, and you've got 2 lights here, and another one as we're walking over to the other spot, there's 2 more lights. And it would take time to set that up sometimes, but sometimes you had it.
Did it help that there was another station in town that was doing some of those same things, and you can point to, well, they're doing it across the street.
Yeah.
We need to do it.
Yep.
I mean, did that little competition help too?
Yeah, and I think at one point, the MPPA had a contest called the Station of the Year. And it went from all the stations in the country competed for one spot to breaking it down by market size. And the first year that there was a small, a medium, and large, we won, and the guys across the street didn't. And I think that had kind of the opposite effect. They were kind of in shock because for a while they thought that anything that they did had to be better than anything we could possibly do. And then to have this, like, what? And so they made a bunch of changes, which then pushed us to make some changes and to try harder, and then we won it again. And at the same time, we had offered a job to one of those people over there, and I think that what it ended up was getting him a promotion and a raise, so he came out of that just fine. And that lasted for a few years, and then, as you talked about management changes, some of that happened, and it got harder to do that, and they kept pushing to do it.
And now it's harder in a corporate environment to have photographers who are photographers solely.
Right.
They are, just think if Mike Borland came out as a reporter now, or as a graduate of Drake now, you would have been on camera a whole lot. You would have been a one-man band all those times. Has that made television news and journalism better? To be more nimble because we've got 12 people instead of 6 people, or 6 crews instead of 12 crews to go somewhere?
Sometimes maybe, yeah. Yeah, and I think another line that I stole from a news director was in breaking news, the firstest with the mostest wins. And you can always send everybody, and if you've got that many people that are all able to take a camera to a place, and can kind of coordinate so they're not all in the same place, parked side by side. There can be some value to that, yeah.
Big stories. I think of your time in Des Moines, the Johnny Gosch disappearance, the Eugene Martin disappearance, the floods of '93, the floods of this era, and the fire here and there. What are the couple of those stories that stand out that stick with you today from your career?
I think the floods of '93 was probably the biggest story here in Des Moines that I covered and worked on, because it was so drastic and lasted so long. There were so many days of like wall-to-wall news almost, and there were some days that all that we had on was news. And I remember walking down Fleur Drive with a reporter and our stuff, and we're walking past where they're sandbagging and that, and we hear Hueys flying overhead, and we didn't even look up. And I kind of commented, but how odd is that you hear helicopters right overhead and you don't even look up? And then to be involved with being in the helicopter as we covered that, and I remember taking off from the parking lot just to the west of the station and getting up over the high school and looking and being able to see just from that perspective as we're still going up in the air, so we're still ascending, and seeing how much water that is, and thought, oh my God, this is huge. And then being able to, seconds after that, we're on the air showing people that. And I think being fortunate to have the willingness to get that helicopter here, and then to have someone like Jim Strickland who could think on his feet and describe things. And we had, I don't know how, but it seemed like if I would see something and I'd zoom in and he couldn't see the picture because we were in just a helicopter that we rented. It wasn't like when we had Chopper 13 and it was all integrated and he could see what I could see and all that. It was me with the door off, with my feet on the struts, leaning out and looking at whatever, and he would see probably the same thing and start to describe it, and I would be showing it already without any kind of communication outside of. Do you see that, Mike?
Could you hear Mike? Could you
I
hear
could
Jim
hear him,
talking?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had to try to narrate or cover his pictures as he's narrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times, as he was narrating, I was able to see it, or he was able to. He just kind of knew what I was talking about or what I was showing, and it felt to me like we had hours and hours and hours in the helicopter doing that, and maybe we did, but to be able to be up there with him and just accompany him as he saw what he saw and described it in the way that only he could do it was fantastic. So yeah, the floods was a huge story here. Some of the stories that I did, and I think it would really surprise people, even that I worked with, that some of the travel that I did. Scott Pope and I went to Ethiopia to cover Iowans there after some fundraising effort that the station and the Des Moines Register did, and spent several days in a tent at a medical camp, and basically watching some of the kids didn't get better, some of the people didn't get better, going to a funeral with these people, and then coming back and kind of seeing the reaction to it, being able to put together an hour-long show that was good, especially by the standards of those days. We also went to Baghdad before the first Gulf War, and were able to come back home with the Iowan that had been one of the guests of Saddam Hussein. Really big story. We kind of scooped NBC and BBC and CBS and everybody else. We were live there before one of the networks was live from Baghdad, which was kind of a coup for us. So stories like that, I think, bigger in my mind than maybe they were in the viewer's mind, because you got to do those things, and that was, I think I was fortunate to be working at a time when stations could put that kind of investment into coverage. It wasn't local, but it affected locally. I mean, because in Ethiopia there were Iowans there as part of the relief effort, and we went to where the money from Iowa was spent. And then in Baghdad, it was an Iowan who was released and reunited with his family, and we were there for that, and then able to come back with a plane load of other guests that had been let go.
Those types of stories just don't happen now.
Right.
I mean, the stories exist, the networks just don't cover them because it is expensive. You can also sometimes get technology from wherever and get the interview of the Iowan somewhere because of the Zoom or the phone, the FaceTime or whatever. So yeah, those opportunities are gone. Does that make you a little sad?
A little bit. I think there's still some value to it, but it's hard to. Journalism has always been one thing that, to me, I don't know how you put a dollar amount on a good story compared to an average story, compared to missing that story altogether. What is that worth? And so I think it's kind of a hard sell to say we got to do this. Yeah, we got to do this in my mind because I think it's best for people to know and the best way for them to see it. And also, I'd like to go to, well, I don't know if anyone else wants to go to Ethiopia when there's a famine. Things like that. I think, and to have a local person interview another local person while the sun's going down with, the mountains are in Ethiopia behind them, and just to have kind of that perspective that this is still people on Earth, and they have no idea what we have and what we've come from, and they're still in the same kind of struggles. They're trying to stay alive, and they're not just kind of the thing to debate about. They're actual people.
Yeah. Debate, politics. I'm sure you've been to Washington, D.C. a time or two, seen a presidential candidate, a president a time or two. You had a pretty good seat for the golden era of the Iowa caucus.
Right, yes.
Any of those stories stand out?
Not a lot.
Because they blend together, right?
They do kind of. Well, one would be going to a, oh gosh, there was an event that I went to, I think it might have been Bob Dole, and there were like Bob Dole, 4 reporters, and 2 supporters. And then go from there to, I think it was George Bush, in a huge packed place, wall-to-wall people, and, the same day, and kind of see the difference in the campaigns from that perspective. Another time, Paul Simon, when he ran, was at an event, and I was outside, and for some reason I was waiting for a ride to pick me up. And we may have gone from one place to another. And Paul Simon comes out, and he's by himself. And he's waiting for a ride. So someone came in a nondescript car, a volunteer came and picked him up and took him to hotel or airport or next event. We talked for a little while. We had found some things in common to talk about. And it was a different kind of thing where the campaigns were not nearly as managed and the media not nearly as managed as they are today. And even, that kind of thing with breaking news and so on. Back when I started, if there was a fire at a house, it wasn't everyone stayed way back behind the fire trucks. Walk up to, where the fire was, and sometimes if there was a firefighter inside and you were by a window, you would get wet, or something like that. Probably did some things we shouldn't have done.
Yeah. I seem to remember a picture in your office, I'm not sure if it was yours, of a fire in Ames at maybe a sorority or fraternity that was in a very cold day and it was all full of icicles. You had to have had element weathers, stories. You talked about the floods.
Right.
There had to be some of those super cold days or super hot days. Is
Yeah,
that when you questioned, what on earth am I doing?
I don't know if it's the best weather story, but I think it's a pretty good one. We had a on-call system where someone would take their stuff home. And just so happened that I was on call and there was a fire at an apartment building in West Des Moines. And when I got there, it was 25 degrees below zero actual temperature. And their hoses kept freezing up. And so the fire would get almost knocked down and then it would get back up again. And I was standing by the fire truck, like trying to warm my hands by the fire truck's exhaust, and that wasn't working. And then there was some commotion and went around the other side of the apartment building, and there's a big tongue of flame coming out way up into the air. And even from where I was, it was like, oh, this feels so good. And I know it was, people's stuff burning up, but that felt so good. And then, so this is middle of the night, and then later in the day, we're back there kind of looking at the damage, and there was ice everywhere, and it was still really, really cold. And so the reporter that I'm with, Tom Hauser, is interviewing the fire chief about how you fight a fire in the cold and stuff like that. And the chief says, and frostbite is a concern, it always takes this much time. And then he looks at Tom and says, and that looks like you might have a little bit of frostbite forming on your nose. And I don't know how long it took, maybe a half a second, and Tom was someplace else. Getting warm, saving that nose. No, and it was horribly cold, and I was chopping the hoses out of the ice, and firefighters that went to the trucks that had coffee and pouring the coffee on their arms and stuff so they could bend them and so on.
So you could certainly get cold.
Yeah.
You could certainly get hot.
Yeah.
You mentioned names. You mentioned Jim Strickland. You worked with a lot of people over. Was there ever a commonality of some of them, and like famous people that went on to great careers who you're like, I taught them that?
I've had people say that they learned such and such from me, or that inspire them in a, wow, I didn't have any idea. But people that went on to great careers or so on. One thing that's hard for me is to remember who worked with who, you know, whose time here overlapped. And that's less difficult now because there are no more.
There's no more new layers.
There's no more layers, yes. Yes. Kim Kerrigan went on to work in Boston for years. Kate Sullivan went to Boston and then Los Angeles. I started just weeks after Jack Cafferty left, so I had never even met him. Only interviewed Donald Call once.
Was that on RAGBRAI?
To circle back. No, it was just over in the studio. I did on RAGBRAI a couple of years ago talk to his daughter for a little while. She was riding on the 50th kind of commemorative and wanted to come back for that, and was able to just kind of overhear her say to another rider, and then when they finished their conversation, wrote up and introduced myself and said that, you know, Donald, your dad, inspired me to become a journalist, and that was my career. And she said he would have liked to have known that. And you know, on RAGBRAI, you ride alongside each other, and then you meet a hill, and you go different speeds, and then you never see each other again.
Right. Last two things. The one is about the people, because you might not remember the advice you gave to someone, the feedback or whatever, but clearly the legion of, as we call it, the coaching tree of Mike Borland, there's plenty of disciples out there who still preach. What's that mean to have so many people who go, that Mike guy, Borland's the one who made me?
Well, it's flattering. I think, I don't know that I'm unusual or a great teacher. I think I had patience, and because I was learning, I was able to keep up with things, and as younger people were learning new techniques that were more native to them possibly, I was trying to keep up, but also learning from them and then giving back. I think that was more in the later years. But we didn't touch on even the last couple of years. I did stories just for the website, and that was probably 4 days a week is what I worked on, and then flying the drone, and so being able to, at long last, do stories that I wanted to do.
You wanted to do.
And pretty much Rod would say, well, if it's done, let's put it on there, and somebody ought to look at it, right? But you know, to have that kind of that free reign to find a visual story and put it together, and then see it kind of promoted as, you know, you can only see it here, and I never did really go see how many people went there to see it. I hope some people saw it because I thought they were fun stories to put together, and some of them came out well.
Do you think you have what's the most viewed, famous video, VOSAT package do you think you ever did get?
Gosh, I have no idea.
I mean, I remember, there's car chases, or there's fires, or there's hanging out the side of a vehicle, there's flying in Chopper 13, there's a whole big career. It's hard to probably name one.
Yeah, I kind of hope it was the one where the police chase was coming at us and Mark Tarshak was driving, and the car spun and crashed right in front of us, and he jumped over the median with my permission, or urging, one or the other. Yeah, we'll be fine.
It's all good.
Yeah.
How does Mike Borland, what is his biography going? What's the lead in your biography?
Jeez. I don't know. I think one thing that we didn't talk about was, you know, I was here forever, and kind of why and the things that afforded me. And that was to be able to raise my family without long absences and still have that career in journalism that I didn't feel like was stuck in the small time or something. That we were able to do things at this station that would be the envy of a lot of larger stations, and, you know, kind of cover the same stories and have the same importance. talked about politics, I met every president from Jimmy Carter to Donald Trump. And there are probably a lot of people in any market that can say that. So what, my biography?
I'm trying to save you from the word obituary instead. I want your biography.
Well,
Mike.
I thought, well, why is he asking me? Do I look sickly?
No, you don't. It's the perspective, and it's fresh perspective.
Okay.
Frankly, you know, and it's and I enjoy perspective, and you had to have had it. You know, the people who sit at your feet and look up, and the gospel according to Mike.
Well, I think some of that, and you know, to be known as a pretty darn good photographer, which I think I was, and to be able to wear some of the other hats and to teach people, and not just photographers, but other jobs in the newsroom that people did, and to be able to work with such fantastic, talented people. I know that's not really a biography kind of thing, but it's, I don't know, visual journalist, I think, is maybe the way I would look at myself, and still kind of do a little bit.
You, flat out, you've informed millions of people in your career through your eyes, and you've taken important stories around the world and gave them to Iowans. That's absolutely something to be proud of. All right, Mike, thank you so much. Mike Borland, our oral history today from the archives of Iowa Broadcasting. I'm Paul Yeager, along with producer Cliff Brockman. Assistance today from Randy Schumacher. Our thanks to Bill Pierson and Rod Peterson at WHO-TV in Des Moines, and our guest today, Mr. Mike Borland. Keep watching these oral histories as we continue to publish them each and every month.